Hi, my love, and welcome back to Cultivate. My name's Bree, and if you're new here, welcome. If you're a long-time listener, welcome back. Today, I want to talk about something that I wish somebody had have told me much earlier in my business, which is how to lead a wedding consultation. When I first started floristry, I had no idea how consultations ran whatsoever. I had no idea what the consultation needed. I had no idea which order it went in, when it needs what it needs. I'd never been a bride before and I'd never actually had one myself. So I didn't really know what to expect. But once I started running my own consultations, I really started noticing what was happening in front of me. And it was only then that I could really start to lead the conversation with a lot more confidence. So after years of running my own consultations and reviewing them with florists that I coach, I found that most florists are not actually losing bookings because they said the wrong thing. They're usually losing bookings because they've moved the conversation forward prematurely before any of the groundwork has been in place. And once you understand what I mean by that, I promise that you will never look at consultations the same way again. So let's start with how consultations usually go. So for a lot of couples, it's their first wedding, right? They haven't had to plan a wedding before. They have absolutely no idea where to begin. So a couple very rarely arrives at a wedding consultation for their flowers with a very perfect brief. They usually arrive with a folder of saved images. They've got a few priorities that they have maybe not really particularly agreed on, and a budget that they feel maybe a little bit uneasy about. And what I often find is that they do have a strong sense of what they want the day to look and feel like, but just no idea about how to make that happen. And let's be really honest for a moment. They're not expected to know how to make sense of all of that, but you, as the professional in the room, you are. And so this is where I see so many florists drop into lots of different patterns, but I want to talk about it in extremes for a moment. On one end of the spectrum is the order taker, right? Who basically just receives the instructions and turns them into a quote. On the other end is the designer who helps the couple actually understand what it is behind their preferences, what it all means for them and their day. And I know that if you're listening to this podcast, that you're already the kind of florist who is a designer or at least is working to become one. So then the question becomes, how do we actually lead a consultation in that designer role? It is by taking real responsibility for the quality and the progression of the conversation from start to finish. And so I'm going to speak quite plainly to you for a moment, just in case nobody has actually told you this yet, but you are responsible, right? You are responsible for creating the conditions in which a couple can speak openly. You are responsible for helping them say what they already know and surface what they don't know yet. You are the one responsible for turning that understanding into a direction that they would not have seen without your expertise, right? This is the work of a designer, not just someone receiving a brief, but collaborating with the couple to define what the brief actually is. And so I work with a lot of florists who want to get better at consultations. And quite often, what they mean by that is that they actually just want to get better bookings as a result of their consultations. But what I've found is that florists who consistently get booked become better at something much more specific, which is creating the conditions that make the booking a natural outcome. And the reason that I started thinking about my consultations in this way is because I kept noticing the same thing, which is that when a consultation went well, it rarely was because of, one big persuasive moment that got the couple over the line. It was usually a series of small moments where the couple became clearer. And you can see it. You can literally see it in a consultation. They become clearer on what they want. They become clearer on what matters. They become clearer on what's possible for them, and they become clearer on whether or not you should be the person that they trust to bring it all together. And so when a consultation doesn't land, it was usually because one of those moments had been skipped or rushed or assumed, which is exactly what led me to map consultations as a sequence. Now, before I actually give you the sequence that I've mapped out, I do want to say one thing really, really clearly, which is that this is not a script. Okay, I don't actually believe in scripts for consultations. And let me tell you why. A script puts your attention on what you are supposed to say next. And the moment your attention is on what's coming next, it stops being on the person in front of you. And in my experience, that is the exact opposite of what makes a great consultation. But what I am going to give you today is a sequence to follow. And the way that I would like you to think about that is a framework for understanding what the conversation needs at each stage and in what order. So it's called the consensus sequence, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it basically has 5 stages: establish, explore, extract, expand, and ensure. And I found that the sequence itself is actually the perfect starting point if you are in those earlier days of your business and you have never really had a way of structuring your consultations before. Equally, though, if you are a little bit more experienced, it does kind of give you a bit of a diagnostic tool, something that you can come back to when a consultation maybe falls flat and you're just not quite sure where to look. So I found it super, super helpful across the board. And so I find it really helpful to think about this sequence like a staircase. So for a moment, I just want you to imagine a staircase with establish at the bottom. And as you take another step up, another stage of the sequence is revealed. This is a really helpful frame because in the consensus sequence, each step creates the footing for the next stage. So you actually can't go to the next step before the one beneath it is sufficiently in place. And once you understand that, a lot of the consultations that maybe previously confused you start to make a lot more sense because you can look at which stage didn't have enough support before moving on. And this is where the sequence becomes so, so useful because when a consultation doesn't convert, it is very easy to look for like an obvious problem, right? Was I confident enough? Did I explain my pricing properly? Did I follow through? Did I ask the right questions? But sometimes the conversation struggled because one stage had not really done its job before you moved on to the next step. And that is the part that I go much deeper into inside the essay, which this whole episode is based on, which is how to recognize which stage is missing when a consultation felt good and didn't convert. You can find the link to my essay on my Substack, The Tall Poppy. The link is in the show notes for you below. And the title for this one is Leading Couples to Commitment. So the reason the consensus sequence works so well is because at its core, a consultation is really a process of reducing uncertainty. Okay. The couple is trying to work out, do I feel comfortable with this person? I'm not sure. Are they going to understand us? Do they get what matters most? Are we going to be able to take on their recommendations? How do I know what happens next? There's just so much uncertainty around the consultation in and of itself. And while none of those questions might be asked directly, it's kind of like the undercurrent of the conversation. And so the way that I want you to think about it as you're moving through the sequence is that you're not just moving through different stages, you are reducing the doubts that would otherwise sit between the couple and a confident decision. Because as doubts reduce, certainty builds. And as certainty builds, commitment becomes easier because the couple has less and less doubts to overcome before they can say yes. So again, those steps are establish, explore, extract, expand, and ensure. So 5 E's. Let's go through them one by one. And I just want you to notice where, in your own consultations, you already do some of these quite naturally and where you might be rushing ahead without realizing it. All right, so the first stage is establish. It's at this stage that the couple is working out very, very quickly whether they feel comfortable with you. They're thinking, can we admit that we want different things? Can we say that we have no idea what flowers cost? Are we okay to share our budget and not be judged? So this stage really answers the couple's first unspoken question, which is, do I feel comfortable enough to be honest with this person? And this stage really, really matters because even if they're not feeling 100% comfortable, they will still answer your questions. But their answers are more likely to be guarded or vague or short, which doesn't really help you in opening up a deeper conversation. And so if you were to build a proposal from that version of the truth, things would be slightly off right from the very beginning. So before you rush into the flowers, the palette, the quantities, all that good stuff, there is a relational foundation that needs to be there. And I find that most florists kind of rush through this stage because it feels like a little bit of, preamble, small talk, nothing really necessary, but it's not. It's literally the foundation that the rest of your consultation stands on. In short, when safety and connection is there, it's easier for the couple to be 100% truthful with you. And the more truthful that they can be, the more dialed in your design can be that you give them later. The second stage is explore. And this is where you start to understand the bigger picture. Because once the couple feels comfortable enough to speak openly, you need to understand what it is that you're actually working with. We really want to understand the whole context of the couple, the day, what they like, what they don't. But this is where I find that florists move really quickly. Maybe the couple shows you one image to show you the venue, and you just start responding to it with all the different flowers that you would put in there or what would look really, really good. Or they say one word and you start building a whole direction based around that. But those things are not actually the brief. They are just pieces of context. So without going wide or, broad in the conversation in those early stages, you can end up going deep on the wrong thing. So you can explore one answer in detail while the whole context around it is missing. And the error with that is that if you're missing the context, it might have changed the way that you looked at it in the first place. And so this is one of those really tricky ways that consultations can get off track so easily. And so explore is really about going wide before you go deep into the conversation. Because the question that the couple are asking at this stage is, does the florist get the bigger picture? Do they understand what we're trying to achieve? And only once you believe the answer is a resounding yes, then you can go deeper. And that brings us to stage 3, extract. And this is where you will find the meaning underneath the information. So if explore was where you get context and information and you go really broad, extract is where you work out what it all really means and go deep. Let me give you an example. The couple might describe their day using words like romantic and relaxed and modern and timeless and colorful, natural, abundant. And while those words on the surface sound really, really clear, they actually aren't specific enough to design from. So you might hear romantic and imagine candlelight and deep reds and layered textures and flowers spilling all over the edges of the table, whereas they might mean creams and ivories and soft linen and something really understated. So this stage is really where you stop treating their first response as the answer and just treat it as an invitation to explore deeper. Not just what colors do you like, but why those colors? Not just what image do you prefer, but what is that image giving you that the others aren't? And this is where the real brief starts to reveal itself. Because the question that the couple are really asking here is, does this florist understand what matters most to us and why? And when you understand that, your recommendations stop being generic and start being shaped by what this couple actually wants and needs. Which brings us to stage 4. This is where you turn insights from that conversation into a direction or a point of view. And this is a stage I find most florists just want to get into, because this is where you get to offer your ideas, showcase your style, and really, let's be real, it's probably one of the more enjoyable parts of the job. This is where you get to bring in your experience, your taste, your knowledge, seasonality, flowers, venues, all of that good stuff. Bring it all together. But expand only really works when it's built on the stages before it. Here's what I mean. Anyone can suggest a really pretty color palette, right? Or a really nice ceremony installation. Those ideas might be good in their own right, but on their own, they're just generic suggestions. What makes them powerful is when the couple can see exactly why that recommendation makes sense for them. So instead of throwing ideas at them, it could sound a lot more like, you've mentioned a few times that you just don't want the reception to feel overdone and that you haven't got a lot of room on the tables. So I'm going to make a suggestion here that we pull back on the reception and repurpose that budget that you've allocated for that area back into your ceremony. Would that be worth exploring? So when your recommendations and suggestions are very clearly connected to their priorities, their budget, their venue, their language, the way that they are trying to describe their entire day, it really feels less like you have pulled an idea out of thin air and more like you have come up with a direction straight from the conversation that you are in real time. And that is exactly what makes it feel relevant, because the question that the couple are asking at this stage is, given everything that the florist now understands and knows about us, does the direction that they're giving feel right? And if the answer is yes, you're no longer just giving them ideas, you're actually helping them get so much clearer about how their unique wedding day could look. And then we come to the final stage, ensure. And this is a stage that even the strongest florists skip, because by this point, the conversation has felt good, right? We're vibing, things are happening, it's all good. And so any checking in or confirming can almost feel a little bit unnecessary. But I think what's important to know here is that discussion is not the same as agreement, and a really nice conversation is not the same as consensus. And so at this final stage, ensure is where you check, right? You reflect back what you've heard. You call out the priorities. You summarize the direction. You really clarify what is still being decided, and you explain what happens next. And I think really importantly, you give the couple some space to correct you before the consultation ends. And this is really important because if something has been misunderstood along the way, you want to find out while the conversation is still open, right? Not after you have spent 3 hours building a proposal that was just never going to be right. And so I think it's really important to say here too that if a couple corrects you in a consultation, it's not a sign that things are wrong. It's actually a sign that the process is working. Because until an interpretation has been checked, it's just an assumption. And assumptions are where a lot of lost bookings begin. So ensure is really the stage that protects this whole conversation just from becoming a big misunderstanding. And so the question the couple are asking themselves at this stage is, are we on the same page about what has been decided, what still needs to be decided, what needs to happen next? So again, those 5 stages are establish to create safety, explore to understand context, extract to gain insight, expand to create perspective, and ensure to make sure there is alignment. And together, those 5 things create consensus. If you've listened to last week's episode, then you'll know that I use the word consensus a little bit differently. It's not consensus like majority rules, but more like agreement or accord or to feel together. And if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I really recommend going back after this one because it will just give you a much deeper understanding. But in short, consensus in the context of a consultation is the point where the couple and the florist are no longer carrying separate interpretations of the same conversation. So it's a real meeting of the minds, and consensus is what gives a couple enough certainty to commit because nobody books confidently while there's still too much uncertainty sitting between them and the decision. And the consensus sequence works because it resolves so many of the most common uncertainties that usually keep a couple hesitating, one layer at a time, right? Until there is just less and less standing between the couple and a very confident yes. So just to summarize here, when each stage creates what the next one needs, a booking becomes more and more likely, not because, you have convinced them or anything like that, but because you have given them fewer and fewer reasons to say no. And that is the part that I really want you to take away today. A strong consultation isn't about having the perfect thing to say. It's about understanding what the conversation needs. And so the full essay goes into, the research behind why this works, what happens when you skip a step, and how to use this as a diagnostic tool after a consultation. The essay itself is called Leading Couples to Commitment. It's on my Substack, the Tall Poppy, and the link is in the show notes below. So with that said, I will see you next week. Thank you so much.